Today on Brews and BizDev, we've got Steve Coulton of Encore Golf. Thanks for coming out, bud. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. Appreciate it.
And 3 weeks in, or 2 months into all this COVID stuff, I still say thanks for coming out as if we've gathered somewhere together. It's pretty. I'm not going to figure out a new phrase.
We'll be drinking beers on the patio soon, right?
Yeah. The patios apparently immediately, right? So
Yep.
A little bit of scarce seating on those patios, I'm sure, but we'll crack that open soon enough. And speaking of cracking it open, your choice for our brew is the That IPA from Community Beer Works. So let's crack into this so we can get to the important stuff. Yeah.
Cheers.
Here's to it, bud.
First, well, I shouldn't say the first virtual cheers. We've done some birthdays and dinners over Zoom, but
yeah,
the first business virtual cheers.
Yes, I've made it a point to work my favorite things together. If we're going to have to do all these Zoom things for everything, then I'm going to enjoy myself through some of them, right?
Hopefully, you're an IPA guy.
I am. I'm as many people have found out. I mean, I'm a big Hayburner fan, and a lot of people are apparently, right? I mean,
that's the big ditch, right?
Yeah, big ditch Hayburner. I mean, that stuff is in random gas stations way deep in the woods. I mean, they've really managed to really get it out there, which is part of the thing. For me, it's very crushable, as they say. Obviously, it's a little higher octane than your average beer. But I'm a big dude, so I can soak that up a little bit. And it's so accessible now. So even if I am out generally in the region, but I can be out and about and you can still find a Hayburner pretty easy. And unfortunately, that's not the case with a lot of these, smaller breweries at this point. But CBWs, they're out there. I mean, they're getting out there, and I love the guys and I love what they put out. So tell me, what is the why? Why did you choose that IPA?
I'm just a big fan of IPAs. Obviously, I love the local beer scene here, and was walking in the co-op the other day, and it's just amazing the amount of variety and selection. And I'm staring at all the different cool logos on the cans, and I'm like, hopefully that doesn't mean I have a problem, but it's cool. It's cool to see the community and the different varieties. I know some people think, we've kind of hit peak craft brewing, and they're kind of maybe not as excited as someone who likes craft beer about it, but I enjoy it. And my business partner, Brett, will tell you, he used to make fun of me because all I would order was IPAs every time we went out. And now, of course, all he drinks is IPAs. So he's I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, a convert, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I think there's a few of those. I think there's a number of people, and I mean, certainly I'm one of them. I mean, I can't go back more than maybe 5-10 years. I don't know what it is. And if you would have said IPA, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not much of a beer connoisseur. Even drinking wise, I've always been more of a brown liquors, bourbons and that kind of stuff kind of person. Obviously, there's only those, that doesn't work in every environment. We don't live in Mad Men anymore, so you can't quite pull that off as much as possible. And there's nothing about a hot summer day that makes me want to drink scotch. Yeah. That's not a thing. So you got to have a beer. And yeah, if you're into craft beer, if you're into different variations of good beer, then let's have as many as possible, right? Let's have as much different angles. And Hayburner is my backup, my go-to. There's always, even my wife also, speaking of converts, she'll have a couple Hayburners now through a summer day. But then trying different stuff. I love that there's so much different cool stuff to try, even the stuff I hate. It's like, oh, I'll never drink this again, but now I know. And, 10 years ago, you had to be a real kind of in that scene, invested, kind of person to know the difference between these things.
Yeah. I also like Guinness, and I know I should probably, step out of my comfort zone and try some of the craft beers that are in that style, because I've heard from people that know more about beer than I do that, they're like, if you think Guinness is good, you gotta try these crafts. So, maybe that's a summer goal, is to just expand my horizons beyond the IPAs.
Yeah. Well, and for summer that can be tough, right? I mean, summer
Yeah.
is hot so far, hot and humid as it usually is in Western New York anyway, and you've got to be able to actually be refreshed by what you're drinking. And I know my experience, I'm not the biggest Guinness guy, and I'm not even, just recently, maybe a month or two ago, someone started talking to me about stouts and those kinds of things, and porters even. I mean, even that dark and heavy, I'm like, yeah, I'm not looking for a meal beer, right? Like, I want to have a few of them, but they're good. Like, oh, okay, if you need one, then it's like so rich and delicious that it's worth, like, okay, now I start to understand the Guinness and like all the rest of it. Like, I'm starting to come into that. But again, if it's 80 degrees out and 90% humidity, I ain't drinking Guinness.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's supposed to be served at room temperature, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's some hot room. That's a hot room. So, off the beer, at least for a moment here, BizDev style. Now, I looked at your LinkedIn. Obviously, we've known each other for a minute, but I looked at your LinkedIn today, and the experience track is interesting. I mean, obviously, for most of us, if we laid out like what our actual track was, like, it'd be a pretty interesting experience section. A lot of people, it's very edited. It's like a resume, right? They've edited it down to be the only, like, the appropriate stuff. And I mean, starting in property management, but then BizDev related, I haven't talked BizDev in the sense of being an art dealer on eBay yet. So please, please tell me about, like, what was that? What were you doing? What was it like? And then, what had you get out of it?
Well, a college roommate of mine, Charles Johnson, we went to NYU together.
Okay.
And that he was actually a large part of the reason how I ended up in Buffalo, just being from Long Island myself. But Charles's family owns the Benjamin Art Gallery on Elmwood.
Okay. Yeah.
And, Charles would be out every night in New York City, dining at the nicest restaurants. And I'm like, dude, what do you, I was scrounging in our couch at, for like quarters for pizza.
Exactly.
And I'm like, you gotta teach me your ways, because, New York City is not cheap. And so he, over the course of, I would say probably a year, we would go, at 6 a.m, we'd go to the flea markets in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And he would show me, how he looked at buying paintings. He was mostly buying oil paintings.
Yeah.
And so he just coached me and taught me. And I started, I bought some things, and I'd bring them back and show them. And he said, "You just bought a fake." And I'd be like, he goes, who sold you that? And he knew the guy. And we'd go back and he'd say, "Look, he spent $200 on this thing, and it's, clearly a fake." But, you kind of learn, I think, with any business, you go into it thinking you're going to be rich and you're going to start out making a lot of money. But that was eye-opening, learning that, you're not going to start out being an expert, and you're going to have some mistakes. And fortunately, it was only a few $100s here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned, watching Charles, and learned how to date the painting. So if you turn over an oil painting, you can tell by the color of the canvas how old it is. And learn to look up artists and their auction histories and their records. And I would find things at flea markets. I'd shoot Charles a text, say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And he'd, instantly buy or say, "Nope, boring," or, "the subject's not sellable." So, I was fortunate in having a mentor.
Yeah.
And I haven't done a lot of buying and selling of paintings in Buffalo, but I'd love to get back into it. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds cool. I like those flea market scenes. Can be fun places to be.
Yeah, it's really sad, because I know the one we went to in Chelsea off 6th Avenue, it was like 23rd Street. I believe they shut down. And the price of real estate was getting so high in New York City that I'm sure they turned it into just, it was like a parking garage, but I'm sure they could sell the spots for cars and,
Oh yeah.
Or retail, what have you. But a lot of those markets were closed. So I don't know how Charles, I think he's moved up the food chain and he's dealing in higher end paintings and dealing with auction houses, but it's a challenging business, being on the hunt and trying to find kind of discrepancies or arbitrage opportunities,
Yeah.
but he's really good at it. And that was how I got into it.
Yeah. Nice. And what had you get out?
Focused on OnCore, on the golf balls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had spent a few years at Deutsche Bank right out of college, and I was working with traders in the commercial paper division. So they were buying and selling corporate debt, and I was assisting them. And unlike the stock market, if you bought a stock, you'd own it pretty much instantly. With the commercial paper market, these hedge funds and private equity shops would be buying and selling, and they might have sold the trade, but they hadn't settled it until months later.
Okay.
So I was just calculating the interest and figuring out who owed what, but it wasn't really something I was passionate about. And, to progress in that, I would have become a trader, and just wasn't for me at that time. And the opportunity with the golf ball and OnCore came about right as I was transitioning out of finance and investment banking, and I've been working full time for OnCore and with Brett and Keith, my partners, and Doug, our engineer, since about 2011.
Yeah. And you get to, my experience is you're floating all over the place on Core, right? Part of your, what you're accountable for there is you're kind of doing a lot of those shows and stuff like that, going to the different, I think you were in Florida or something at one point, and we were going to get together. So obviously recently there's been a little bit less of that. So what would you say, you're accountable for? Like, what is it that you're responsible for at OnCore?
So my title is VP of Sales, co-founder, VP of Sales, but it's changed. About a year ago, we switched our business model to online direct to consumer, and it was fortunate timing with everything that's happened with COVID, and a lot of our competitors. If you look at Dick's Sporting Goods and PGA Superstore. Those retail outlets were shut down. Yeah. So if if we had a lot of our product in those stores, we wouldn't be, making any money basically. So, we were selling to a lot of pro shops. We still have pro shops that we sell to, but even a lot of those were shut down. You could still golf in a lot of places, but you couldn't go inside the pro shop. Right. So really the only place you could buy balls were online. So we were lucky in that regard. It wasn't a Zoom or a Peloton type situation where it was like a perfect, home run, but certainly one of the more fortunate businesses with it being accepted and socially distanced. You can still play golf and all that. So, but I say that because when we were selling to Dick's Sporting Goods and Wegmans and PGA Superstore, I had a more traditional sales role where I drive to Pittsburgh and meet with the Dick's buyers and try to sell them on OnCore. And now that we're online, it's like we're trying to hit 1 million singles. We're trying to, as opposed to 1 or 2 big home runs for the year. And 30% of our business was online. A few years ago, 70% was through pro shops, through Dick's, through Wegmans. And within about a year, we've switched that, 70% online, 30% retail. So
nice.
I think you probably, being in biz dev, sales, marketing, I view sales and marketing as one and the same now. And it's, my job is to help market OnCore properly online,
Mm-hmm.
digitally, through email, through Facebook, Instagram, Google, and try to grow sales that way.
Yeah, yeah. And does that tend to look like for you now? So is it like personal profile stuff? I mean, like what's your day to day? If you're not traveling to Dick's and pitching people in meetings, like what are you actually engaged in on a day to day?
I just play golf all day.
Oh, good. I was hoping for that answer.
So we've got a team called Disruptive. They're out of Utah, and
Okay.
they handle the digital buying
Mm-hmm.
and placement. We've got a graphic designer in-house, Peter Drew. So Brett Blakely and I, we work with Peter and create the ads. And then this group Disruptive, they know how to place them optimally across, Facebook, Instagram, Google.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a in-house tech guy, Mike Bongiovanni,
Mm-hmm.
and he's really well versed in Google and SEO and all of these things. So it's, I kind of do, I do a lot of the, just kind of coordinating, organizing, making sure, we're on track with our promotions, with our campaigns, with holidays, sales. You wear 100 different hats.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like it. And slightly different ones than you were wearing last year. Right. So, excellent.
Always learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and obviously, having, pivoted, as we like to say, already, a very fortunate turn, right? Because obviously it wasn't because you saw a pandemic coming. It was because what internal and external factors, you're like, okay, this is our play.
Yeah.
And if you had been still locked in that model, then yes, this would have been a little more of a massive hit. I would imagine, like it is for people who are dependent on events and live gatherings and meetings with other people where you have 5 people in a room. So, what do you think is the hardest? Because I think there's a lot of, one of the things I see out there and people I'm connected with, like you said, marketing and sales, who knows where that line is and where the difference is, because they're supposed to be supporting each other. And I mean that actively, right? Because sales can mess things up that marketing set up well, and marketing can certainly do pretty things that are really then generate crappy leads, and sales can't handle it. And I've noticed, the online mix, and I mean, I'm in the B2B world heavily, right? So that's where I see this, but where you've got the kind of content marketing and people who are sales, but also doing like a personal brand. And I guess that's what I do technically is, on the ground sales work, but my own marketing as well, and helping other marketing people and actually measuring things, by revenue, right? So the world of demand gen, as it's been called the last few years, is like, okay, well, marketing, these are both doing the same thing. They're both supposed to feed out into dollars in, and hopefully a pretty low cost to acquire a customer, right? So, so with those things being in mind, what has it been like for you personally, switching gears, even though, yeah, they're all pointed the same way, and you're a founder of the business, you're a partner in the business, so obviously you always have a stake in profit and revenue. You want to be up all the time. What's that switch been like for you from doing like more face-to-face kind of sales and then coordinating to more of just kind of coordinating digital people doing their thing? I mean, do you like that? Like, do you wish you talked to more people, or you played more golf, or what's it like?
I think it's the wave of the future. And so I'm fortunate in that we took that pivot, because, whatever business I end up in, 5, 10, 15 years from now, that experience with online direct to consumer is going to be huge,
Yeah.
So while it is kind of a bit of a shock to your, your day to day, and you realize you don't know half of what you need to know in terms of, what is the lifetime value of a customer? What is your, return on ad spend? All these metrics that these digital, sales experts talk about, it was overwhelming, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. But particularly with the virus, I think we saw that even if you've got a storefront, you need that e-commerce presence, and that's going to be true even after the virus passes. You're still going to need that. So yeah, I feel fortunate in that we went down that road, and that it was uncomfortable to begin with, and a lot of it still is, but that's good, because it means you're challenging yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If it's too comfortable, then you're probably just stagnating.
Yeah. That's likely the case. And if you have to kick it back into gear at some point, that's a really bad thing.
Yep.
If you've reached the peak, then stagnate all you want. But
and just to, I mean, I think early on we wanted that validation of our product is in Dick's. That means it's up there with Titleist, with Callaway, with TaylorMade, and a lot of new brands, I think they struggle with that, wanting to have the distribution, but the reality is you don't have the brand name, and we didn't, we put the cart ahead of the horse.
Mm-hmm.
It was great that we were able to get into these shops, but once you're in Dick's, they really don't care. They're not going to market your brand for you.
Right.
So then all of a sudden, it's, they're pushing TaylorMade, they're pushing Callaway, but they're not going to push you.
Right.
So, now you're spending money to drive someone, into Dick's, and you don't even know who that customer is that buys your product. It's at a lower margin. And so we're kind of the mindset, let's build our brand direct to consumer. We control the messaging, we understand who the customer is, we can service them better. And if we get big enough to a point where people are going into a Dick's across the country asking for it, then yeah, maybe we'll go into it. But for now, I think we're in a good spot.
No doubt. And I'm sure you when people are asking Dick's and then Dick's comes asking you, then those margins are a little bit better on those deals.
Exactly.
So yeah, actually generating demand. So I guess last thing is, like, is there one thing, because it's pretty rare, but I think, like you said, it's becoming more and more of a thing where people who have been, let's just do it old school sales, right? You're used to selling, you're used to interfacing that way, and then switching and learning digital, which is insane and impossible even when you're totally devoted to it, and then it changes next week, right? But as someone who's coming from one world kind of into the other, is there anything that you thought you knew about marketing, you thought you knew about digital, or any opinion you had that then once you had to kind of get into it a little bit, you found out, oh man, I was wrong, and now I know it's this way? Is there any particular kind of ahas or insights, or man, I really missed the boat, that you've experienced in the transitioning of roles?
I think that happens more than I'd like to admit.
Okay, yeah.
And like, we'll come up with a campaign that we think is, it's like ownership bias. Like, I came up with, this numbers matter campaign, and we were going head to head with Titleist. We were showing how our ball was better, and it didn't do as well as we thought. And it's like, you think your ideas are the best and the greatest, and then you get the data, and it's like, well, wasn't as good as I thought, And I think it's just, not letting your ego get in the way. And a lot of it is analytical and numbers driven, and you could be the greatest salesman and the greatest pitchman and think you have the best ideas, but if they don't work, you've got to be humble enough to just accept it.
Yeah.
And, and celebrate, when someone's got a good idea, because, it is harder than it looks. And there's been instances of even just people, my colleagues have brought on board that maybe I thought, they're old school, or, they're kind of past their prime, and they've led to, for example, Charles Schwab is one of our investors.
Okay.
And he came through a colleague of ours that, I probably would have said, I don't know what kind of value he can add. And it's like, you never know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it could happen in, a day from hiring someone. It could happen a year. So there's been a lot of things that I realized after the fact how wrong my view was on it, and that, on someone, and that's where I think trusting your colleagues too.
Yeah.
And just realizing that as smart as you think you are, and as capable, it's good to let others, take action, and because you're going to be surprised.
Yeah. That's
right.
That's a way to put it lightly. You'll definitely get surprised at some points. And I think that's, I guess the transition the other way would be hard too, because if you're a digital person and you're hanging out and looking at screens and stuff all the time, like, you're not the person that's going to go out and like, hey, shaking hands. But vice versa, where, a lot of salespeople are successful because of a certain kind of ability to, like the ego, right? You got to have like that kind of thing. And like, you're closing out, because if you can't block out noise with ego alone, it can be hard to hear no 80 times a day for your entire life. So I think that's a kind of a point within a point there, where that part of the transition for people who have been successful in a traditional sales thing, where like, oh yeah, no, your ideas are going last. And it's not about even what gets an individual sale, because you can pour a bunch of effort and attention and idea, into something. But if you can't replicate that, right, to a billion people, if you're online, then it's still not a worthwhile endeavor. Like, you can't actually replicate that, and the ego gets in the way of saying, oh, you know what, man, I was wildly mistaken. I was totally wrong. You were right. So I hope that's, and maybe age helps, being below a certain barrier before the brain's just like, yeah, no, I'm done admitting I'm wrong. But I hope that more people can make the adaptation, that you are and that you have, because yeah, I believe it's some version of the combination of those things is where everything, it's pretty much where it is already, unless you're selling, I don't even know what, like small widgets to industrial family businesses who have all sworn off the internet. I think that's where it's going. And yeah, my experience is really effective salespeople aren't the easiest folks to change. So,
well, I'm kind of curious too, because I know I watch a lot of your VidWheel, the videos you guys put out, and I think you guys do a really good job with the content. And I know, being in the golf industry, we sometimes struggle with what kind of content should we put out? Should it just be about our products? Should it be about golf news? Should it be, trick shots, and it's hard because there are so many different, there's a million different golf news outlets. So, to think we could do that better than someone is, it's just not going to happen. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious kind of how you think about your content strategy, and how it might help us, or at least structure it,
Yeah. Well, and those are always, and of course the answers are always totally like, oh, well, who are you trying to reach and who's going to, right? Like the marketing and, the questions and answers start with who are you talking to, or who do you want to be talking to? And, I think for, on the VidWheel side of things, certainly, we've aimed largely totally local, right? Because VidWheel is video production, and now this is changing. We've had a lot of changes recently ourselves. A year ago, we did not pivot into the right business model to deal with COVID. We went in the wrong direction, frankly, for this. it was the right direction overall, except for then a pandemic happened. And so the whole partnering with people at every level and being that real video partner, you know, we can't shoot anything, we can't do anything. So, so we're pivoting back out into more of a run and gun kind of like help people who are creating content, like through consulting and set up their own stuff and all this kind of thing. And then of course, production, post-production, we will support whereas people need it. But that's challenging because we spent a year building this whole new thing out of Nickel City Graphics that will then change. And I think at a local level, you know, you can go a couple different ways with content that maybe don't apply when you're just like full out national, because we weren't competing with 100, you know, like 8 billion other places doing something. There's only so many video shops in at all in Buffalo, and you know, there's a D post, right? So if you got the cash to burn and you want a real heavy duty action, you know, go to like those guys are great at that stuff. You know, for, you know, it's like one of their videos is like the equivalent of one of our video contracts that we, for, you know, for a year. And then there's, you know, every new person coming out of a video program or everyone who's got like a phone and an app and a thing. And so, you know, for us, our position is actually pretty clear, is it's like, it's right in that middle spot. And even now, like, cool, if you think you want to do better than just shooting yourself, then like we can actually help you do that better. Right. So being real clear on who we are competing and not competing with. Right. Like, so we're not going to do a us versus them numbers, you know, numbers matter, us versus D post. Like, yeah, if numbers matter for you, like a low cost, you come with us. Right. But not so low, like I'm going to take whatever I can get. I want to pay as little as possible because, again, like marketing, I believe I know about video and what it's going to take. So for us, it was like, now that person in that range, what do they actually need? And like listening to those customers complain about other companies, certainly, but also about like, why don't people do video? Like, why aren't more people doing it? And we thought it was money. And I mean, that's a thing, especially for a real small business and especially these days a little bit, but most of it is fear and uncertainty, which also hasn't gone down much recently in general, right? But that's what we, you know, time and time again, people are like, I don't want to do it because I'm going to look bad. I don't know what to say. I'm going to freeze. And it's weird. I mean, it's weird. I mean, Zoom is kind of, at least you're looking at a face. Like shooting a video, like you're just looking in this little black hole, and even if you're good in front of people, it's awkward and you have to get used to it. So we had to design, our content is designed around giving all the information we possibly can so that you're as comfortable with it, even if you did it yourself. And then if you don't want to do it yourself, or you hit the spot where you're like, I thought I was going to, but it's a pain in the ass and I'd rather pay money, then we come in. Right. So that knowledge allowed us to make that kind of content that spoke to people. And then you apply the normal rules. It's got to be entertaining, especially now. The COVID stuff, like boring business information, nobody cares because everyone on the planet's putting out crappy content. You know, everyone's on their computer. They're either just looking, they're not buying, they're just looking, and they're putting out like mediocre content. So you actually have to engage and like entertain people as well as, because my experiences, we're looking to be distracted as much as we are looking to be productive, which is a tough dynamic to pull off unless your content is both fun and useful and informative. Yeah. So I think that's the spot, is not so much like that there's competition or not. Locally, that's easy. But like with Renoun, you know, we're expanding, and part of where this series will go even is like, this allows us, even in this format, like it doesn't have to be Buffalo people. Like we're going to go, because we have a different kind of target market, you know, solar companies and stuff like that. So then the game is, other people are doing content, but I would say like, okay, well still, but what are they not doing? You know, there's some kind of gap. There's always some kind of gap. And I think the easiest way is, and this is kind of 101 sounding, but it's one of these 101s that nobody does, which is like most 101. Do you know your target market? No, I think everybody, you know, I think it's really about like, talk to some people who would be buying your thing. I mean, it's really as simple at a certain level, and then you can bring in data to support the conclusions or do some testing to get your data, but like ask like, how did you buy this ball? Because it doesn't work linearly. People don't like think I should get a golf ball, you know, and then go through some sales funnel. Like that's not how people search. You search, you find one thing. Of course, retargeting starts serving your stuff up over and over again, and they hate you after a little while, or they finally buy. But you know, for B2B, for complex sales, you got to like look around. Like you surf, and then you hit another link, and then you forget about it for 10 minutes, and then a week later, I jump online again. And so like the question is like, can I ask enough questions close enough to my customer where I can start to get a sense of what that popping around looks like? Because maybe I want to be out, you know, I don't have to be a different shop. I just want to have that content show up where they're looking. And I want it to have it be the right content for I already looked that up last week. And now I'm looking up this very specific like progression. And most people don't have their content laid out in progressions. They don't. They have it laid out in their sales funnel progression, but there's a difference between a fucking sales funnel and a buyer's journey. A buyer's journey is what someone does when they're trying to get something, and if your funnel doesn't match, then your content sucks.
Well, and even though you're B2B and I'm more B2C,
yeah,
I hear you saying customer a lot, and it's the same for us. I always love the story about Jeff Bezos, where supposedly at every meeting he's got some kind of stuffed animal in an empty chair. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to represent the customer.
Customer, yeah.
So it's like everything they're talking about, how does it affect the customer in that chair? So let's not lose sight of that. And I know when we started the business, we thought we'll be cool, young, edgy, and we'll target millennials. But we found out that most of our customers were, you know, they were boomers.
Yeah.
They had discretionary income and they were playing golf. It was largely a male demographic, but you know, and I guess in one of those situations, how would you advise, you know, that the company with a disconnect between, you know, who they set out to target and who their actual customer is, right?
yeah, that's also a tough learn when you get in the middle of that, like, oh, everything we've geared towards is off. And I think I would make it up because I would have figured like, okay, well, boomers would have the most money. They're probably playing a little more golf generally than the millennials who are, you know, like, let's go stereotype, making their avocado toast and stuff, but they're like doing the experience thing. So you look for a subset, but even amidst that boomer crowd, like there are some people like they're going to never stop. They're always going to use the same ball. They've been using the same ball forever. They're always going to like, so there's that life cycle. There's that product cycle, right? Those different groups of people. And then there's, what does Coulton call it? The dip, right? So there's that gap in between where even if you grab some early adopters, you can't go mass market with it. There's going to be that thing. And I think that's finding out, oh, it's a different person buying. Well, the first thing I would do marketing wise is then real quick change our voice slightly. Right? Because me trying to like speak to millennials, I'm going to use different terms. I'm going to use different, you know, so they have all those brand design exercises, but voice, like tone, the respect versus irrelevant, right? Respectful versus irreverent, which I personally fall on the irreverent side, but like I'm not as irreverent as I would normally be. People are shocked to find out even on LinkedIn, because that wasn't the vidwheel thing. Right? Like I had to blend with Neil, who is, you know, very different personality, not irreverent in that way. And so we spent months. That was the easy part. The names and stuff are different, but we did that exercise. We workshopped what's the voice, what's the tone, and then personally, right, then when you do things like we do, where I'm doing personal LinkedIn stuff, I can have that be more me. But I've like, if my tone doesn't match, you know, like there are certain rooms I'd be a moron if I walked in and started swearing like I normally do in regular life. And at the office, like it's just going to be, you know, no, if it's Charles Schwab, to just go to your example, you know, and I walk in even like this or with a hoodie on and I'm like, hey, what's up, Chuck? You know, I mean, it's not a good vibe. But if I walk down to ACV and do that, or if I get, Dan Giganti back, like that's how we're going to be. So I think that when you know that customer is different, like, okay. And again, it's listening, talking to them. You even pick up or have some people are better than others. You pick up the differences of tone, like the phrasing that people are using, and then you put that right into what you're putting out there. So like your customer literally hears themselves in your copy and then moves. I think that's the first thing, is change your voice to talk to that boomer who's probably not the super old guy. He's willing to try new things. He's looking for an edge. So he's still like trying to beat people, take that and match that tone. And then figure out, okay, well, why did you use the ball? Was that because it's cool, it's hip, you're just, desperate, you're trying or is it like you go out every week for a round with this guy who's your superior and you just cannot beat this guy, and like you're starting to build a vendetta, you can't sleep at night, you feel like less of a man because you just can't come out on top. You find some story like that where it's like, oh, this gave me the edge and I beat my boss or I beat my client. Or something where it's like, because that's golf, it's B2B in that way. And that a lot of what golf is getting used for is it's still a classic business thing. So, having a thing that talks to somebody about that, why do numbers matter? They matter on two levels, right? Like you'll get better performance with this, which means you land that deal with how impressed your client is at your skills. Some kind of progression like that. And I'm totally making this shit up based on knowing nothing except for that they're boomers, but that's where I would go. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. As you were talking, it reminded me of, it was a podcast, I think it was talking about your brand story and how it can kind of change over time in terms of, you don't want to just make it up to fit whatever you're trying to sell or that. But they said, sometimes a journalist or a customer will say something to you about your brand that you didn't even think about, but it's how they interpret it. Yeah. And you can kind of weave that into your story. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because you always have this idea of who you are and what you stand for and how people interpret you. But then a journalist or, a customer can go write a review or a story on you. And it's like, oh, I never really thought about that, Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah. They're going to see things that you won't. So there's their own, what they add, but then there's also what they can see that you can't see in the mirror. Cause self-evaluation is not a strong point of the human brain. Yeah. And even when we get in teams, then we have team blind spots, especially if we know the people on our teams and there's not a lot of diversity of viewpoint. Then we can all just keep going down that same path. But I think that, telling the story the way that their story is the one that makes the most sense. And and someone was just harping on this to me a couple of weeks ago in one of these Zoom things. But the key with the story is that like you're not the hero. Also, so when you're doing like real traditional, like a story framework, people are like, hey, look at us, our company is so great, our golf balls kick ass, it's like, okay, cool. Like, I don't care about any of that, because again, since you're not a titleist or whatever, people aren't going to like be wearing your gear out because it's going to get them recognition. So like, what is the thing, like the emotional thing that most feeds that they're struggling with? And as Eustace put it, like the company, like you're not Skywalker, you are Yoda. The client, the customer is Skywalker. And so the story has to be one of you actually knowing what their struggle is, what their big pain point, as they say in old school sales, but like what that tribulation is, what that transformation looks like. And then you're the person helping them through that. So that gives you a different perspective than the just trying to fit what I'm saying into someone else's voice. It's like, how do I threw out the weird example of the like beating your client or like looking good in front of your client, right? But if that's a real motivation for someone who maybe otherwise who cares. But if golf is part of my business routine and I'm okay but like, I don't want to be out on the green with the clients. And I know some people like, hey, lose on purpose, because you don't want the client to feel bad or the prospect to feel bad, but you don't want to look like an asshole. Like, you don't want to look like you've never been out there before. And if they know you're out every week, you want to look good. Right. So it's a story of me looking better to my friends and my prospects, not a story of my golf ball goes further.
Yeah. Well, we had a new products meeting, and one of the things that came up was the placement of our logo, like the OnCore Golf on the hat, and kind of how, you know, we've only got so much money to invest in new products. And the point was made that it should be invested in the products that will get the brand the most visibility. Mm-hmm. So whether that's a golf bag or a hat, you know, but that kind of comes back to what you're saying about you're not Skywalker, you know, and, you know, is that a selfish thing that we're trying to push on our customer rather than, you know, what does the customer want? You know, maybe they don't care about the OnCore Golf logo. Maybe they like your symbol, even though that's not going to help you much, because a lot of people might not know it. But I guess it's that back and forth that companies struggle with. And I know Steve Jobs tended to be, you know, the customer doesn't know what they want. I know what the customer, you know, will want, kind of. And it's really, I guess it's a fine line, you know?
Yeah. Because even with Steve Jobs, he was big into UX. I mean, the things, we attribute a lot to him that he didn't do, except for he talked about it. He's the only one that anyone ever heard from, because everyone else was locked in a dungeon somewhere, getting forced in their reality distortion field or whatever they called it. But he was making guesses, and that's a good statement, because yes, if you ask people what they want, they don't know necessarily. But if you ask them what their dreams are, I heard this like last week, right? If you ask them like what the vision is, then there's a little bit, usually a better idea, and then you fill in, oh, here's the gap, and so here's what you actually want, because this will do it. But obviously they were very design oriented, because that's still the competitive advantage, besides the culty, you know, like besides the marketing and the people just wanting to feel like Apple people, is a lot of their stuff worked a little bit better, like design and feel wise. And that's because he did know what they wanted, because he was projecting himself into it. Like, oh, these things are, you know, the earphones, right? They always get tangled up. And so we're going to put this little clip in, you know, that Steve Jobs genius where, you know, they spend years designing this entire piece of thing, and he adds a clip, and that becomes the story about he's such a great designer. But it's a good insight. But that's not, you know, if you asked a customer, would they say, I want a clip? No. But you still are looking from the perspective of what would be best for them, whether they know they want it. And that's different than just saying, I'll tell you what I want or what you want, right? I'll tell you what you want. And I've been sold things that way. That's not a good experience.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. And design is, it's so important from a visual aesthetic standpoint that I think there's more acceptance now. But in the past, it might have just seemed, you know, like a wasted expense or you know, trivial.
Yeah.
But he was the master at it for sure.
Yeah. That's their edge. And then the marketing took it from there. And then the people themselves took it from there. But if the thing was some clunky, you know, piece of crap that, you know, then the whole like, oh, also this doesn't interface with any other thing that's not Apple very well, then those other actual problems would have become real problems. But because that screen worked better, the two touch screen and all that kind of stuff that they came out with, and still, I mean, hell, the phone I just got a few months ago, I'm like, I made a mistake. Not like I should have gone Apple, because I like how Android actually works with stuff. But like, oh, I made a mistake on the one I got, because the screen never quite gets it right. And I need it to be precise. I got these like sausage fingers on these little screens. Like I can't do much. So it has to be precise to work. And I just think, oh, if Apple products worked with anything else, and if they weren't all 80 times more expensive than everything, so I have to buy the whole suite and it's going to be like a $10,000 investment, then I would switch. Right. So yeah, I think getting close enough with the customer, and in his case, right, that's just easy because like, how do I hold a phone? How do I do what, but thinking about like what's actually going to be a better experience for them, even if, to your label example, even if I lose something on like the traditional side of like, oh, well, when someone fishes these balls out of the bottom of the lake, like how are they going to know it's an Encore ball if they don't, like, who the fuck ever bought became a lifetime buyer of golf balls because there is a certain logo on the ball that they found somewhere, like
Right.
I don't know, and I could be wildly wrong right here, but I don't know that found balls or like that kind of spread is going to help business more than something that works even better for the person who's already bought it. Because I'm in Renoun's like this too, like leverage the customer you already have. Not so we're talking a lot about talking to them and getting the answers and letting them dictate the story and them being the hero, but also the people who are buying from you, whatever the stat is, right, are 23 times more likely to buy from you than someone who's never bought from you before. So if you want to keep selling balls, keep having those balls be the best visually, every other thing, right, the best possible thing. That's how it spreads. And then you have some funny videos and good content, that's entertaining enough for people to share it. And that helps. But I think.
Yeah. Well, so a few things. I know anytime I talk to a customer, I hear them say, I bought 2 dozen, 3 dozen, and I gave them all away. It's like they really like to share the product. Maybe it's because they feel like they've discovered a new brand that their friends probably don't know about, and they'll feel good by, introducing them to it. But as you were saying that, it's like, how do we tap into that, our customers, the fact that they're 23 times more likely to buy, and how do we encourage them to share it and grow that way? Because, it already happens naturally. So making that easier, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then, to your point about just talking to the customer, how do you recommend a company do that? I mean, we've, you're B2B, we're B2C. We've done some surveys. I get calls from people. So I talk to them, that way. Someone puts me in touch with someone that they heard liked the ball, that sort of thing. But
yeah,
I guess what would your advice be to a business that is trying to really understand their customer better at a deeper level?
I think this, certainly surveys make sense. Like anywhere, right, that you can solicit real feedback. Certain things are going to be slanted. So if someone's coming to you, someone who sends you an email because like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Like, oh, well, I do want to interact with that, right? Maybe at the level of brief call or Zoom call, like, because I want to find out like your version, not the, like, if I sent you an email, then you have to think about it in a way where you have to type it, right? Like these kind of conversations, you get a little more of the real thing because most people don't write as easily as they talk. And so the formulation kills some of what's coming through. So if I can convert an email or something like that into a quick live conversation and I know my questions, then I can engage with that person. But here's the person I also want to engage with, the person who's not writing in saying how awesome it is. Right? Like, because that's not going to tell me more about like what we can add or what we can develop and what we can hone. And maybe I don't want the straight up complainers, like the troll. I don't want trolls, and which is hard to segment those out in our society. I'll get some, but some like legit complaints. I want to I want to get in those conversations really heavy and be like, okay, well, what didn't you like? But really, as much of that middle segment as I can talk to. Like who is like, cool, you're using it, or maybe you bought it once. That's what I really want to know. Who bought it once and like, yeah, no, okay, cool. And then never bought it again. And how do you reach out to them is, well, if they've bought it, like you at least have that touch point, they came in contact with it. So if you can create some kind of an incentive, and of course people use contests and all this kind of stuff for this, drop a golden ticket in there somewhere, like the the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory / Michael Scott golden ticket promotion, like some kind of way where you can solicit people giving feedback that otherwise wouldn't, because they're not that excited about it and they don't hate it enough to go negative with it. They're just like, okay, if I can get more of that middle segment to reach out, like this is not a testimonial. Like, I just want to know what you thought was awesome and what you thought wasn't, because if you don't solicit and engage and actually kind of incentivize that conversation, that middle crowd doesn't want to have it. It's like they're indifferent. So you got to you got to bring it out of the indifferent people. Like what would have made, it's kind of like the NPS survey, the normal NPS score survey. Like, hey, here's the number. Like, what would we have to do for you to have given that a higher number? But again, indifferent people don't even respond to those surveys. So some kind of creative way to have them reach out because they think they're going to win something or other. And again, that's not a set of your balls, because if they were that excited about the balls, they wouldn't be in the middle segment, they'd be in the other one, right? So you got to find out, but you know that they golf. You got to find a way to set up something where it lures people in because of the possibility of the prize, that you can talk to people that otherwise would have just forgotten about it, and then figure out how to make it unforgettable.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because you've got your repeat customers,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got your inactives who just haven't bought, but they're in your database, and then you've got your single purchases. So it sounds like you're saying hone in on that single purchase, and I mean, in reality, you've got to convert those to repeats to survive as a business. And I think that's true for most businesses, because you can only spend so much to acquire new customers. Eventually you're going to run out of new customers. And so you better, I mean, we're fortunate in that we do see some pretty high repeat purchase numbers, but it can always be better.
Yeah. And again, and that's where your leverage is, right? So that's like, they're still going to be more likely to buy than other people, especially if you start engaging them with like extra goodies, and like you show up as a company like, listen, we want to make this great for you. We're not trying to reach every Tom, Dick, and Harry out here. It's, it's the, like, we care about you because you're the one who uses our stuff. How can this be better? And even you as a person who's not going to write in, who's not going to say anything, who's just going to buy another set of balls, like, we want you using our stuff every time, because that person is showing up week after week with your balls in tow is what's going to have it spread to the other people at that club and wherever that is. So you got the most leverage. They've already bought, so you have some kind of information on them, right? At least some kind of retargeting, if no direct kind of contact information. And that segment, as well as, since I just hit retargeting, if you're getting good enough data on people who are coming in, looking at your stuff long periods, right, and they're bailing with the shop, like, of course there's a cart abandonment, follow up and stuff, but I mean, even like long dwell, like that, like, oh, I was just about to, and for some reason I'm just not, and I bought this once. Like, that is the group of people that I want to just tip over into being super big fans, and like, fuck all the rest of the people, really. I mean, like, it's minimum viable audience, to really reach the people who are going to be crazy for what we're doing, and then let them spread it.
How do you think brands like Lululemon and Tesla, as far as I understand, they don't spend money on marketing and advertising.
Mm-hmm.
I know Casper derives a lot of their traffic. It's organic. It's from their customers doing like unboxing videos of their mattresses. Obviously, I think that's the holy grail for early stage companies who only have so much runway and so much marketing dollars. But how do you think those companies are able to do that? And do you think they just set out and said, like, fuck it, we're not going to spend money to market our Teslas. We're going to let, our product or customers do it?
Yeah, well, I think that, and I can speak to Lululemon a little bit better than I can to Tesla because I've been involved with companies who ran alongside them. I used to work with and for like the personal development company that Lululemon, that Chip Wilson was a big fan of
Okay.
back in the day when he founded it. And I know now things are probably different because Chip's been out for a minute and stuff like that and doing his other stuff. But that's a piece of it is they found like here's who our person is. And again, for them, it was like people like us, right? That always makes it easier when you are your person. So there's a caveat. Like when you are your person, then it's really easy. It's a lot easier to figure out how to speak to yourself and then excite yourself. You don't have to project at all or do the personas, but it just helps. But Lululemon, and I mean, and they get this as a criticism, just like Apple does, right? They're culty.
Right.
So, but they're putting the Coulton culture. I mean, when you've got that much of a culture, like an internal, like it's the people who work there are the clients actually, and reverse. People who buy their stuff get so enamored that they go and I mean, sometimes they're volunteering at like Lululemon. They've set up a system that actually, like, listen, here's our person. You are a personal development freak. Like, it's all about growth. It's always about growth. This is a part of that. Like, this is a brand that matches what you give most of a shit about in the world, which is you're growing as a person and therefore you're a yoga person, not just yoga person, not the casual yoga mom, not not someone who doesn't do yoga. They just wear yoga pants in the house instead of sweatpants, right? It's like they wanted the crazies. They wanted that culty, like we are so obsessively devoted to developments. That's what's in their charter. So their employees are like that and therefore attract other people who are like that. And here's where my dog starts playing with the bone while I'm talking. Hey, buddy, stop. So that's then they just expand it out from there. But the message is clear. They know who they're looking for. They know to a certain degree what that person tends to look like. There's a certain type that maybe not the most diverse crowd I've ever seen in my life, right? But it's like it is like, here's this type, this is what they're fanatic about, and our company represents that fanaticism, and some people hate it. It's like, oh, we could see through your pants that one year when they put out the stuff and they poorly designed it, and it's like, what is this? This is wrong. I assure you, no one in their base cared because they've turned that around quick enough, right? And I think Tesla's got the same thing. I mean, Tesla's got a real cult of personality going, right? So you have people who will put 90 hours, 100-hour weeks in because they think that Elon Musk is going to save the planet, right? That he's our next big billionaire savior. I don't know about that. There might be something else at play, but they believe it. The people who are there believe it. And of course, they get paid well. Lululemon, that's not quite the case. I mean, some of those folks are half volunteer, but that's the thing. If you got people that are so insane about what you're doing, they're just volunteering their time, kind of like you talk, like people shooting their own videos of unboxing things because they're so excited. That's because it's a product tuned right to the right person. The messaging is not trying to reach, it's trying to reach no one except that person. And then whoever else is like, oh, man, I guess their pants are probably worth checking out. Like if I'm going to do yoga pants, I might as well see why these are so expensive.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the hardest things we struggle with is like we'd love for everyone and anyone under the sun to play the golf ball. But to your point, like if you don't really define that customer that you're targeting and what they look like, how they feel, how they behave, then there's you're not gonna grow like you want to. And it's tough because when you go down that path, you feel like you're excluding all these customers.
Yep. Yeah.
And it doesn't make intuitive sense.
No, it doesn't work with how the brain naturally wants to, like, hey,
Yeah.
listen, well, I want to be for everybody. I don't want to like close anyone off, except nothing ever is for, except for like the worst products. And the commodities, right, are for everything, like toilet paper, and even that went up in price recently. Like, so you don't want to be that, and you can't break into a market that way for sure. And yeah, so when you find that, like, what is the thing that like is a driver, like the driver for that person? So for that boomer, the boomer who's doing new, like what has him be willing to do new things, like what's going to drive him making the new purchase, and then what was it about it that worked that he made it again? Because if you can get that story, if it is the like, I'm trying to beat this one person, or just an insanely competitive person, then you can go in on that the same way that Nike, like, listen, they got those ads. Like most people don't wake up at 4:30 a.m. and go running and like identify that, like that's an actual a way smaller segment than you'd think from watching Nike advertising for the last 25 years. But they're not saying like, hey, I mean, for those days you feel like it and you got nothing else going on, throw on some. The point is just fucking do it. and that's the Kobe attitude, right? Is like that driven, insanely driven competitive thing. Like just do it. You drive yourself. Now, other people also buy Nikes because they've gotten all over the place. And so some of them don't cost a lot. And so plenty of people, fewer people these days in politics are wearing, are wearing Nikes who aren't that insanely driven 4 a.m. run 10 miles person every single day. But you don't advertise to the other people. Just the same way Nike said, you know what, we also don't care about this aging white conservative segment. Like that's not where the world market's going. And it's not even where this country's market's going. And so, I don't believe them to be the most principled people on earth necessarily in the Nike boardroom, but they know marketing wise. And because they have enough brand, they're like, okay, we're going to go on this Kaepernick thing. That's what our current / next market comes. Like the people who are burning Nikes bought $30 Nikes at Walmart. Like those are not Nike's customers. So, knowing who your customer is and what drives that person, like the almost nutty drive that we all have some version of in one way or another, there's something we're nutty about. If you can tap into what that is, you'll then find why the other people didn't buy more sets or whatever, because they're not that person. And that's not bad news. Like, how do we find more of this person? Because then they will spread it to their friends who probably also in their friend circles are probably, like if you get up to run at 4 a.m., you can do it by yourself, or you can do the November project kind of shit, right? And you're out there with 100 people doing sit-ups in the freezing cold at like 5:30. There's the base. And then that spreads. And so you get those people out, like Osberg was out. I talked to him a few days ago, right, on the phone, and he's like going to meet, I forget, Max Winterburn, I think, for to play some golf. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know you could still do that, right? Like, shocker, I'm not a golf person. Like, otherwise I would have definitely known that you could still do that activity in this thing. But like that guy, right, it has a certain kind of drive about it. So even if he didn't know you and we didn't all know each other, like, okay, well, what's drive? And he's the younger non-boomer crowd, but like there's an older version of that. And if I can find that thing that's just like, yes, where they think this is like the cause, then you give them exactly what they want and then some, and let them spread it from there. I mean, you have to make it easy for them to spread it, right? You can't like get in their way. You have to like still build stuff in so it's easily spreadable, and make your content then still engaging so that that person shares that with their friends. So not only do they send them a set of balls, and not only do they get asked questions about it on the green, but then they will share a piece of content, because it's like, and it's specific, right? It's not like 10 tips for a better day at golf. It's like, here 3 ways to crush that prospect on the green tomorrow or something. Like you get like really nitty gritty in the language and tone that person's operating in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know when you were talking about Lululemon, I think you were saying they were designing it kind of for themselves, so it was easy for them.
Yeah.
And I know I think I've heard Elon Musk say, I built the car I wanted, kind of, and it wasn't like, I was doing customer surveys and trying to figure out what other people wanted, and it was, he was kind of building from what he wanted.
And he had the latitude too, right? Because he's already rich. So most of us
And
don't have the latitude to do what we want and then put money behind it so it turns out well enough that other people like it. And Lululemon, I mean, I think they had some money flowing through there, but it was more of an actual build. Like they built a culture, and it's like in
yeah,
their charter. I mean, to the point they paid for, and some would say compelled their employees to go do the programs at that company I'm talking about. Which some people are like, this is insane. Like, is that even legal? Don't think you can do this. But that's how, like, no, we're going to give you this, right? Like, we're going to make sure that you're one of us and that you're always growing. And we think this is what growing looks like. And so you either look like this or you're out. And that's hard to do. Yeah. When it's not you.
yeah. No, I think, just everyone's talking about ambassadors and, tapping into these people on social media with followings. But I think, when I hear you say that, like they were pretty specific about what they wanted their loyalists to do and how they wanted them to do it. And I think for a lot of companies, they're kind of almost at the mercy of the ambassador, and they're just like, let me just send product and hope that they post about it. But I think being a little bit more strategic about, what you have them doing, and, kind of that message is important. It sounds like, it's a big part of how Lululemon got people to do free yoga and to volunteer and to do all these different things.
Yeah. I mean, practically unpaid employees because they believed in, the mission, right? So when you really get a mission driven, they manage to actually do that well. Everyone wants to do that. Everyone wants to have ambassadors, and we're mission driven. And you read some bullshit statement about like how we're going to be positioned as the best. Like, no, that's not what a mission is. Like Lululemon was about, whether you believe it or not, or whether it's legit, or whether they like doing weekend transformational seminars actually get you anywhere. Those are all debatable topics. And I've got some opinions on them, but what they were about was personal growth and transformation. And then they had yoga pants, expensive yoga pants for the kind of people who were obsessed with that stuff. So, people, it was not like these are the best. I mean, maybe they were good. I can't judge yoga pants, but it wasn't about the quality, though the quality then did raise over the years for sure. And they put money into that. But what people were attached to was that mission and that growth feel, that growth culture. And so that's whatever your version of that is. Yes, if you can find that, that's definitely the Holy Grail. Except for people have actually found this, being the difference between that and Holy Grail is like this actually has been found in a few spots. And if you can make the hard choice, I mean, you have the conversations, you do the listening, you figure out who that is, and then you make the hard choice called, and it doesn't matter if people who aren't this person like hate us. It doesn't matter if you're going to put out something with a certain tone that these other folks are going to be like, that's abhorrent. Like, I don't even want that on my course, okay. And because you will get some of that. If you get specific enough, if you have a real human voice and you're saying something that other people aren't saying, you're going to get some blowback, but you will find your people. You can't find your people or get, like the same thing that gets you your people gets you the blowback. And the question is, are you willing to take the blowback to find the right person?
Right. Yeah. That's well said. You gotta take a risk to find that, to discover that customer. Yeah. How do you think about price? Because it sounds like you've got some experience with early stage companies going up against, larger competitors, whether it's in the consumer space or whether it's with your B2B video business, because that's something I think a lot of entrepreneurs and people starting businesses struggle. Everyone's got to set a price, right? And, in our space, to a certain extent, you could argue, a golf ball is a commodity. They're all white and they've got dimples and they fly. Obviously there's a lot of variation, and we're companies spending millions of dollars trying to make that marketing statement or that point of differentiation. But we've got the Titleist Pro V1 that's kind of at the top, and then you've got Costco, who's launching a Kirkland signature ball that's, a fourth of the price. And, of course they make their money on their memberships. Yeah. So I've always heard, you're better off being the most expensive or the cheapest, and, kind of in the middle gets lost. Now, I don't necessarily know that that's true for, it's a pretty broad generalization, but I'm just curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's, and it's certainly, it's not my domain of expertise, and certainly pricing when you're in the world of services is way different than when you're in the world of products, right? Because there actually is some kind of thing, at least you can start with at a product where right. Hey, it costs something to make this. And services are a little more arbitrary past a certain point. But I think probably the same with products where obviously the price has to be high enough where you're not losing money, which is, again, 101. And also I've seen people lose money, like they don't know their numbers well enough to make money off what they're selling, even to cover expenses off what they're selling. So knowing what the breakdown is, so that that not only cost of goods sold like production, but then on the other side, when we roll our stuff in, like we can actually possibly make money off this, even if it's a penny a ball or whatever it is at that scale. So setting the bottom, really critical. And then as far as, I think the approach is, I guess it's nice as a heuristic to say, like, don't get stuck in the middle, because for most things that's true, right? It's like pick a lane, get on one side or the other, and then at least you'll stand out. Certainly the lowest price doesn't seem like a good place to be. You've got to have a certain size of operation to be able to pull that off and have it be worthwhile. But I think there's a lot of segments in that middle. I think there's a lot of lanes in that middle. And so a certain range of balls. So, in most, I think, positions and industries, there's going to be someone at the top and they've got some high end thing. And like, to try to price out of that is just going to get you in trouble to try to beat that at a higher price, because it's likely you can't even deliver to what the expectations are. Right. And leave that alone. But the old thing, the immutable laws kind of a thing, is positioning. So within a certain range below that, then there's a whole bunch of options and people you can go up against head to head. And so if I'm going against number 2, and then if I can come in a little below them, right, then that's probably a good thing. If I demonstrate that I'm still in this position with them, and then here's what makes me better. Oh, but at a slightly lower cost. Now, not knowing your customer, it's dangerous to say any of this stuff, right? Because then there's a certain customer, Lululemon might be a good example. Like, yeah, probably the more expensive those things are, the more drawn people are going to be to the pants, because they think, well, that's the best one. And since I'm this like personal development, everything's the best and impeccable, like I'm going to get that. Versus someone who's like, yeah, no, I need yoga pants that I can also wear around, like they're not going to, so depending on who's going to buy the Encore balls, I think that the higher end of the range, if it is that disposable cash boomer, and certainly if it was like this profile I've just made up on the spot, like where they're trying to like just beat somebody, it's like, but it's going to be a status thing. What the hell do you play? There's so much status wrapped up in golf that it's always a status play. And then the question is status amongst who? Right? It's not amongst just like everybody. It's amongst who they're walking out there with. And so if I'm in a team and we're going out and my buddies are coming out with like whatever, like the Titleist, like the most expensive stuff, then yeah, I'm going to get a ball that's maybe it's cool and maybe I'm going to beat them with it, but it's not going to be like, hey, I'm going to impress them because it's only like $1. Like you're not going to say that to impress anybody on a golf course. Right. So I think in your industry, probably I would skew towards the higher. And I can get away with that higher price because, again, the customer is right. Now, the vast majority of everybody will not buy at that price. Just like most of them aren't going to buy anyway. Way more of them are certainly not going to buy at the highest price going. But if I've got a real high price and I'm speaking the language of my person, then like, yes, like this feels me, I get it. I'm getting, kind of like recreated like this, these people like understand. So this is going to be good. And then of course I get the ball and it works. that's the important next stage is like, okay, does it justify that expense, so that I can gloat and then say, yeah, and actually it's, the same price or cheaper if these guys are busting out like the best of everything, like you'll be less expensive.
Yeah, no, I was looking at like Peloton for my mom, and I Googled Peloton to do some research, and the NordiTrack popped up, and it's got the side by side, basically like, our bike can tilt at 45 degrees. Pelotons can't, it just went line by line and showed you. And I thought that was pretty smart because, all the buzz is on Peloton, and,
Oh, yeah.
we're stuck at home and gyms are closed. And I thought it was pretty savvy how they did that.
Yeah. Yeah. The comparison grid can go a long way when you're going head to head and someone's killing it. And like at the brand level, someone's killing it. Then you need content that says like, yeah, no, that's cute. And if you don't want to be the jerk who plays off their bad press, right, which is an angle. Some people don't mind being that jerk, and running content that runs counter, like, here's our product for the people who aren't like pretentious douchebag, like that's not what you're going to say, right? But I mean, Peloton was getting slammed there for a minute about like the absurdity of like their lofty commercials and blah, blah, blah. Now, again, Peloton doesn't care.
Yeah.
That feedback is part of the calculated thing of going super high end. But as a competitor, some people agree with that feedback, and I could like go right off of that, right? And just say like, oh yes, like what if you got even more capability with less of the baggage and non-marketing nonsense, like, so I would, but then that's a very different tone of copy. That's a very different presentation. I don't even want to come across that slick, right? Because I'm going against that. So knowing who I'm against, and then what my person, like we talked about Apple and all the phones thing. And again, I've made a wrong choice. Like Moto is really fallen off a cliff as far as the shit they're putting out. But Android in general, I'm someone who's more functionality oriented than I am like, oh, I'm out in line, for 3 hours at the store with you too. And like, I'm an Apple person. Like in fact, for me, there was so much of that I avoided Apple for a long time. I had a couple other things. I had a BlackBerry or some absurd thing, and then got an iPhone. And then I still went away from it later because of the not working with other things very well. But that's me. I'm not the Apple target. Yeah. Clearly, right? Because that, the design, the pretty, and the fact that people identify me a certain way, like, no, like you got to be able to work with Google Docs. Like, are you shitting me? Like, I got to have this work. So that advertising and like the cool Apple stuff, like it doesn't have an impact on me. But yeah, I know that they're not trying to get me.
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny. Like when you see people driving certain cars, and you try to kind of reverse engineer like what kind of person, their personality, and it's true. It's like, well, what does that product say about you, and kind of finding out, like when someone buys your product, what do they think that image is they're putting out?
Yeah.
Because chances are you probably have no clue, but it means something to that person. And that, I think trying to find that out for OnCore would be be really interesting. Whether it's just the confidence, the performance, the price, who knows,
like what's the driver so far? And because then you can also ask yourselves, once you actually talk to the people and like sort that out, you'd also make a choice. Because it doesn't necessarily mean you pivot into something else, like to beat that person. It might mean, like, okay, well, we know that that's not our person, so we can actually save a bunch of money on where we're placing ads and all the rest of it, and like just triple down on this one person who is, maybe it's an easier voice for us. Like it's a match on product, and it's easy for us to like hit there, and I think it's a match. So even if that's 10% of my current market, there's more, as long as there's enough of them out there, then like that's going to be in those people's friends. So yeah, it's really like it's an insane level of targeting. It's what most people would think is an insane level of targeting, because most people don't do targeting unless they're like in digital, and that still means something different than what I'm talking about, right? Like retargeting and finding them. Like I'm talking about like, who's the person? Who is the person? What do they identify with? What is that before and after transformation, which we also forget sometimes with products like this? Like, yeah, there's a before and an after. Like people don't act, and they certainly don't buy shit to stay the same.
Yeah.
Something must have either dropped out that they're replacing, or they're adding something, but it's in line with something. So who is it that they're trying to be by having this ball? Because, and also with the way that your product lays out, it's not like people are going to like, hey, like you pull out this big thing, right? And it's like, oh, OnCore. Oh, you're using OnCore. You know, it's like not necessarily like the most wide open thing. The performance will show. But if you hit that brand voice right, then it's way more shareable. Like that's where the content spreads, and that's where they start giving stuff away even more to their friends. Like you got to try these things, or you create, of course, a discount thing. So if you find these are really great, let us know, shoot us in the thing, and then we'll give you, whatever, 80% off another pack. The deal is though, that has to be for someone else. Right. So you set up a gift thing so that people can get a crazy discount and like just ship it. So they're not just spreading it to their friends. You're spreading it to their friends, right? They're spreading it, but you're still sending, and then you have their friends.
Yeah. Not to beat a dead horse with this Lululemon analogy, but I know like they've been obviously doing really well, and you've got Under Armour that was kind of like, protect this house, super performance. And I guess Lulu just kind of hit on that whole athleisure, and they saw a market that, I don't know that it really existed. And someone had some foresight, and it's like, how do you predict the future or invent it in a way, so that your products serve that need and can dominate that space. It's I don't know, like in terms of video, do you guys spend a lot of time thinking about like where the future is moving, and how can you kind of get there first?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly been some of that at the local. I mean, some of this has been forced because of all the pivoting required lately. So like now, if you're going to change, right, you can either change and just try to scrap through the next 6 months, or you can change and try to figure out what is the long-term play. So hence that BidWheel is going into the more creator network kind of space, and supporting that, because that's where we see the future is. I mean, certainly there's large production video will still be a thing, and TV and all that stuff for a minute. But the emerging market is people doing some version of it themselves. And that's a fit for who Neil is. So, because there'll be less of me involved in all of this going forward, except for I'll be managing a lot of it because Neil's got 2 kids stuck in a house right now, and it's just insane. So he's got very little bandwidth, but the model is like, it should require less people altogether, because it's really like a networked kind of group of people, DIY creators who like hacking stuff, right? So it's not like, I only need the finest equipment. Like, like you got to be okay. Like over here, part of what's blocking the window light are these sound things that Neil made by himself. They're blankets, or maybe a towel or some shit, like wrapped around some kind of scaffolding. And we use them as soundproofing. And they happen to be roughly the shape of the windows in my home office here. So they're also light block. But like some people hate that, including some employees we've had, right? Like they're like, no, the best equipment, and like, oh, everything's so, but Neil loves that stuff. And there are other people, plenty of people now, who are coming and creating video and want to be piecing it together themselves and like that vibe. So that's the target going forward.
Yeah.
Which is both what are they doing, but also how they do it and what they like about the process. So it's like, okay, stop trying to convert people who want to spend a bunch of money into being like, hack it together yourself and just make a better version. So we go there. And the thing is, while it's not like a market in terms of a bunch of those people are already buying stuff that way, because this doesn't exist yet. So really this is fairly new, and certainly new in Buffalo in an environment like this. But like Lululemon, no, those people were there. They were it.
Yeah.
There was some at that time, I'm sure, some other pair of expensive ass yoga pants. Like there was something, like it wasn't much of a market. It wasn't some brand name that you know through the world like Lululemon is. Also, that name helps, right? So you got a goofy little name, a memorable goofy name that has little viscerally to do with what they're doing and selling, but who has a culture that's all about growth. And there's that 35 to 45-year-old white woman who's in a pretty good position in life, who's, taking charge and into the self-help stuff and into this and doing those seminars and, going out and beating drums in the woods and just kind of all of that kind of stuff. Like those people that were there, they were there the whole time, except like these are our people. Like, who will come in and buy this kind of product? Well, like, let's set up a shop so they can do this, free stuff over here. We're going to have yoga classes. We'll recommend these courses to them. Like, let's provide an experience that this person resonates with. And so it's not that they invented a market, but it's not like those people just appeared. Like they were there. Lululemon is just the first person to speak to them directly and not worry about the rest of the noise, not worry about placating anyone else. Like, are you this person? You're going to love this shit. And then they grew. And so now people know them, but still it's a back and forth. You can see feedback on both sides from people's Lululemon experience. It's not all good, but it's never going to be all good. And the people who love it.
Yeah. So are you familiar with the branding firm Saatchi? I think they're out on the West Coast.
I don't think so.
I read something they said the other day about how with so much marketing out there, so much clutter, consumers really can only retain so much.
Yeah.
And it was this concept of there's only one thing that they're going to remember about your company or your brand, and figure what's that one word, and I think they use, MasterCard was priceless. But do you think about branding and marketing as kind of that condensed, what's the easy thing that someone can grab and remember and share and pass on, so that it's not, your message isn't diluted by, 5 different, things you're trying to get across?
Certainly. I think the simpler, the better with most anything, and certainly in the noise that we exist in on a constant basis at this point, you need to be able to penetrate. I don't know if one thing sounds like a great brand, because we're the company who's going to say you have to have one thing, and hey, that's that company's one thing, right? So that's a nice way for a marketing company to put that out. And models have to be simpler than the actual reality we're going to deal with. But certainly with any given communication, I think that's the case. Like, to grab them, it's like a headline, right? Like, you're going by content, you're scrolling on social or something. Like, there's got to be either that visual or the headline, or ideally both. But like, you've got to have a grab and a stop. Hence the world of clickbait and all that kind of stuff. So per communication, I think one thing makes sense, and one, maybe two to 3 things. I don't think you can go any more than 3 as like an overall brand. I think you really muddy. There's a reason people love sets of 3 so much, and I forget the stats on it now, but there's a categorization thing in the brain where we're just, you're not going to hold. You're just not going to hold. Even if we were out in the woods on a mountain and there was no social constantly and advertising everywhere, like, your brain only holds so many things. Our brains are face crazy, and we only hold, what is it, like, I think 5 or 6 basic face models for each person's brain. Ones that look closer to us, like we recognize. So, some of that stuff, like when people say, all whatever, look, like it's awful racist bullshit. But then there is something in the brain. You have to get past stupid biology, but there is something in the brain where it makes it way easier for me to recognize a face that's similar to mine than the other like 4 basic types my brain can hold. And I think that's a worthwhile thing to know, because I'm not going to try to tell someone 800 things. I mean, shit, we've been here like an hour and a half plus already.
Wow.
If we had to like sit down and it was like, all right, we got to come up with the one, like the one thing, like, we really blew that at this point. Right. So I think you can have room for certain things, but if you have 2 to 3, and then you have one thing for every communication, you're not going to communicate 3 things in the headline. You're going to communicate one thing. In headline, I do copy, so I always think in terms of words, right? So headline, and then like the lead. The journalism saying is don't bury the lead. Like that's 101 journalism school. You don't like, oh, and here's this, and you build out your details, and you climax at the end of the story. Like this is journalism. Like it's not a novel. Like you put the headline, and then you give that summary that like, here's the part you really care about. Oh, and now we're going to hash out the details if you want to keep reading. Right? It's TLDR is the modern version. So the question is what's your TLDR? What's your too long didn't read? What do you want to get across? If no one's going to get past the headline, no one's, or the visual, the image, if you're on Instagram, right? If no one's, they're not going to, like look, oh, what's the caption? And what do all these comments say? Like, what do you got to like land right there? And then the answer to that lies in that customer's brain.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I can't. There's so many instances of I'll reference the headline that I read, and then I'm like, well, I can't really provide any context because I didn't read the article, but it sounded good, and it was memorable. And they're like, but well, why is that? And I'm like, I got to go back and read that article,
Yeah, I got to figure it out. Yeah, I'll say things like, well, I read this thing the other day, and it's like, well, I mean, I read a headline. I didn't actually click on it. I didn't read it, but I mean, that's as much space as we have. And then if it's something we care about, if the headline works and we're the right person, we're going to read that thing, But even that today is interest enough? No, because then you get distracted, and then hence, like we talked about earlier with how people really search things and how you really learn online is not in this like 45 straight minutes of doing this one thing in this one order. And then, oh, they want me to go to their next page now. Like it's all over the place, and it's probably like 10 different times we've sat down. And then one time randomly I get served an ad, and I'm like, yeah, no, I remember that. Cool. And I put it down. Like that's how it goes. So I got to be able to catch them with one idea headline so it sticks, but I can have a few different things, because if I'm going to hit them a few different times, or they're going to find me a few different times, I can make 3 points. It's okay. Like I can be the best priced ball at this performance level or something, right? I mean, you could say, oh, that's like one thing, except you just added 2 things in it. That's really not one thing. That's two. You're hitting 2 feature spots.
We need a slick copywriter like you on board.
Yes, yeah. Well, there's a fair amount of good. Yeah, there's a fair amount of terrible copywriters out there too. But the strategy helps that, right? I mean, if you don't know the person, like you could put the best writer in town out in there or in the world, and what they're going to need to know is who's the audience, what do they care about, right? Writing fiction, you make that up, and it still has to be believable. And this is like that, right? It's fictional. You're kind of making up a profile, but you're making it up based on real life interviews, real life feedback, and then have somebody actually, say something that they care about. Like ask them what the one thing is.
Yeah.
Like what's the one thing, everything else being equal, the one thing that you care most about? Golf balls or golf? Or you just keep hitting that why. Like I love why questions. So for the interviewing, like, oh, and why does that matter? If you can ask why does that matter in 3 or 4 different ways so people don't get irritated like you're patronizing them. Like, oh, what bearing does that have on you? Oh, okay, that seems important to you. Like, what would you say is the most important thing about that, right? If you can ask why 4 different times, eventually you get past that part where the customer doesn't know what they want, because they start telling you, even though they didn't think about it either, what really, really drives the show. And then again, you fill in that middle stuff with your content and your ball performance. So.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. I watched a course on it was a journalist, and he was teaching. It was Skillshare or Coursera, one of these online learning sites, and it was really fascinating because he talked about how there's a simple way to write something, and then there's jargon, there's an overly complex, there's completely redundant way. And I was guilty of it. You know, I would say the same word in the next sentence and the next sentence, or, you know, there'd be a more direct way of saying something where you could cut a whole paragraph down to one sentence.
Yeah.
And he's like, you don't want to make people do mental gymnastics in their head trying to figure out what the hell you're saying.
Yeah, because they won't.
And it was really, it made a lot of sense to me, but I was never taught it, you know? And I think that copywriting and those kind of journalistic skills could go a long way for a lot of small businesses. And
yeah, well, and I think that one of the things, and at least some feedback that I've gotten recently, because a bunch of people have come to me. I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago on like LinkedIn or something, and so then I got a bunch of follow up because I said like, listen, I'll jump on a Zoom with you. I'll give you some pointers. I have no problem just obviously here we are 2 hours later, right? Just like going out. None of this is what I had planned to do in this conversation. But, you know, then they talk about like how I write. So there's the profile piece, but then there's like posting. And I write, and wow, this did not come easy, conversationally. I'm attempting, you know, I'm writing similar to how I would talk. Right. Again, less swearing, a little less, you know, here and there. It's a little more thought out. And then you always have these limits, right? A LinkedIn post is 1,300 characters, period. So, which seems insanely long for most people if you're used to Twitter and that kind of stuff. But I can tell you, it is not that long when you're actually trying to like tell a story or make a point. Yeah. Like I go and I'm in the red, and then it's like I cut it down and I cut it down and I cut it down. And that's my style because I have a conversational style anyway. I want to write that way, but it's very hard. And people have said like, yes, I try to do that and it comes out so stiff. Like I'm not the best writer. And I'm like, listen, I get it. Like that's all practice. It's all, I mean, you have to know the stuff, but it's not, you know, you can go on digitalmarketer.com and take a copywriting certification right now and then write me something next week and I'll, you know, it's garbage, right? I mean, that's not going to do it. You want to learn the stuff like anything else and like digital marketing, right? But you got to practice and test and practice and test and practice and test. I've been writing LinkedIn posts and like my own marketing as a consultant and whatever else for like 10 years. It was terrible before. Like there are many reasons a lot of the marketing failed, and there always are. But I mean, weird, jargony, disconnected stuff. It's kind of like in a conversation with people because, you know, in your head, you can jump around. And so you put something out and it connects for you. But that's because you've been thinking about it and it's in your brain, and in between spoken sentences, you have a thought you don't say out loud. So you jump somewhere else, but the other person is like totally lost. So being able to write well is helpful. Conversationally is critical because unless you're writing tech manuals, right? Unless you're writing something that needs to be precise jargon for it to be effective, nobody wants to hear it, even if they're in the same industry, even if they know the terms. Like you want to have a conversation with people, you know, and you don't, you know, unless you walk around saying, I cannot do that. And I shan't, you know, like, no, that's called can't. You conjugate, you put a little apostrophe in there. Like those little things are, you know, go a long way towards like, oh, like you said with this person on this course, someone just reading it, actually like getting it, and someone figuring out what they're trying to read, because nobody's going to give you that time. Right. No one's going to give you that time to like, oh boy, this is sure is confusing. I feel like there's going to be a payoff. Like, no, they're gone. Like they're gone.
Yeah. It's really challenging with, it's a social network. You know, there's that line between self-promotion and trying to provide educational, valuable content. I think you guys do a really good job of striking that balance. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely more educational, more, you know, more content that people can take action on and that can help them. how do you, I guess, how do you think about that line of like, I'll go to post something and I'll say, you know what, that's just me, you know, singing my praises, you know,
Mhm.
and so I'm curious how you know, posting quite a bit, how you think about that line between what's too promotional versus, you know, this is a good content. This is something that's worth posting.
Yeah, you know, it's certainly a good question and a constant issue slash problem. I think in social in general, but certainly LinkedIn because it's just business, right? It's all just business. And I tend to draw the lines differently around company page and personal is my approach. So even though, for example, now, and I'll be doing this with Renoun going forward as well. So I'm putting out, if it's most likely, if it's coming from VidWheel on LinkedIn, certainly it's I just wrote it and put it together and put it out. I didn't produce the video, but then there's my personal thing. And if anyone looks, I mean, it's been a long time since I just did like a reshare. I mean, I think when COVID hit and we had to do like put out our notices kind of thing, like, hey, here's what we're doing, I reshared that company post. But
Right.
for the most part, I don't just do the rehashing promotional content. And even the company stuff, I mean, I try to keep that focused on like our podcasts, right? We're just value. Now, of course, we're going to put out some stuff. I've done some, you know, basics for small businesses, video content and those kinds of things. But even that content, I've tried to have be value-based content and non-promotional, except for when, and I hate salesy sales shit. So I'm a good screen for it, right? I'm going to err on the side of don't put that out. You know, except for like we're going to run a deal or something like that. I've promoted deals once in the last year. I promoted a deal that we ran for at the end of last year for strategy. So it's just me going to do strategy. So I
Yeah.
think that putting out a little more straightforward business stuff, and certainly self-promotional, right? Case studies, that kind of stuff that's promotional, but still also very much helpful. If I can do both at the same time, I will. And then I don't know the last time that I did a personal post that promotes anything, like a product or service directly.
Right.
I try not to at all. The people whose stuff I also like on LinkedIn and other places tend to have that same philosophy. Like, tell a story, right? Tell a valuable story. You know, I mean, like this past week, I mean, I thought about it and I did a Black Lives Matter post. Not something, a few other people have been doing that. Obviously, it's not something that anybody was ever doing before then, because it was, you know, divisive in politics in the workplace. But I think those lines are coming down in the world, and some of them should be. And so I was willing to make a post, then stand out on that ledge a little bit. And the traction, you know, stats wise of the post is equivalent to, it's right on par with anything else I've put out. It hits all my averages, and I do the premium so I can see my reach. I can see all the stuff coming in. So my personal view, well, number one, also, if you're not in B2B, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on LinkedIn, because A, it's just very business oriented. And then B, a large contingent of the people on there, certainly pre-COVID and probably post when it shakes out a little bit more, are marketers, consultants, coaches. Like, it's people are just marketing, right? So it's not like, you know, a lot of business owners, they might have a profile, but they're not like hanging out on LinkedIn checking content. They're like getting overwhelmed by being a fucking business owner, right? Like, they don't have time to be on social. It's a lot of marketers, but there are a lot of down from the owners, right? I think the value of LinkedIn is if you're in B2B and you can connect with the people who are around decision makers, not even right to them. And those people who often, right, tell the higher ups what to choose, right? They get to make the decision, but they task the people with figuring out what to do. And if that person has seen me put out content, and in Buffalo, it's not hard. I'm like a LinkedIn superstar at Buffalo levels. It's like, oh, every day I wake up and there's your face, you know, like there you are in the profile. Like, if it's time to make a choice about like, oh, who should we bring in for like marketing or for video or something, like, I like my odds that I'm in that conversation, unless you don't like me or my voice at all, which I've been pretty clear about, right? So for me, the personal profile, gets way more reach, because LinkedIn is the only platform left where just because someone in your network likes something means you can see it. And no other platform, it's like harder and harder unless Facebook, for example, serves it to you. You may like this because these people liked it. You don't see stuff just because other people engage with it. LinkedIn's the only one left. And people are there for some kind of a business reason. And the organic reach is still, even right now, it's down, but it's still higher than anywhere else. But those company pages only reach the people that have liked that page. Yep. I know, thanks. There's my 5-minute warning there. So I think that the LinkedIn piece is really important to get the value, tell your story, demonstrate your credibility. People know, right? My cover photo or whatever tells you what company I'm from. Like, all that's there. I don't need to emphasize that at all. If you've been learning how to do video from me, when it comes time to need to get some paid video help, I feel good it's going to be me that you're gonna reach out to. So that's my overall approach, certainly for LinkedIn, but I think social in general. Obviously, targeted advertising is one thing, but even in paid social, Chris Walker talks a lot about this on LinkedIn and in other places. But like, pay money to get your content in front of people. Like, target and pay money to not drop ads and not do click-through forms and all this kind of like immediate convert shit. Like, get your content and then find out if it's good by getting that in front of people and let people share content and engage, and then come to you the way they actually come to stuff online, which is bouncing all over the place. I saw this once, I read a paragraph, I got the straight, all that kind of stuff, even without retargeting. If you have a select enough base, you can just keep pushing your content out into those circles and let them work their way back. Now, B2C, smaller ticket price, a little more advertising is fine, but I think, B2B, they're not doing it a lot, and B2C, they're not doing it a lot. Like, use paid social to put good content in front of people and bring them to you, versus trying to like convert them on some Facebook fucking ad form that like fills it in by itself. So you get 18,000 accidental submissions and wonder, like, are these people bots? Like, what's happening? Like, no, they made it so easy to fill that form out that people are doing it on accident.
Yeah.
But what they don't do on accident is read your stuff, like it, come to your website, and then buy something. Nobody does that on accident. They only fill out forms on accident, which wastes your money and screws up your numbers.
Well, I think that's great advice, because the benefit too of putting your effort into good content is that you're going to get the non-paid organic reach of it.
Yeah.
And then you put some money behind it, and yeah, maybe it's not a static to come by whatever it is you're selling, but now you've got an interesting, marketing piece, branding piece, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's going to be less salesy by nature, because you're just putting it out.
It's not even in a funnel. Like, this is very probably like, you can run this by Disruptible or whatever later, and they'll be like, fuck that guy. Like, don't you ever listen to that guy again. It's a counterintuitive kind of a thing where it's like, but that's what I would call demand gen, right? The people who are then coming, like, those leads are real. Those forms are real. They're going to buy something. They're going to, like, if you've got some kind of like build up and then you want to get like this little core product, like, by the time they get to you, they want your stuff, whether you're selling golf balls or, consulting. Like, they're going to come to you because they see the value, and to go back to our original conversation, because you talk to them in the right way, right? You hit their voice, they read their post because it was like, oh man, I really dig this. I resonate with this. Like, yeah, I got this thing tomorrow. I got to crush these assholes. Like, I'm going to get out here. Like, that's going to have them read it. They're going to remember that. And then when you happen to serve up another piece of content in their feed later, it starts building that thing. And if they didn't buy automatically, when it comes time, when they're out of balls or whatever it is, like whatever that trigger event is, you are going to be the thing, the resource they go to. And it's going to be the kind of folks who are going to, like, as long as the balls work, right, that is going to be that customer. They came to you because of the message and the brand and the culture and like what you're putting out there. The ball came through and it worked, and hopefully like it exceeded the expectations. And then you're off and running. Like that person coming to you worth 50 people who fill out some bullshit autofill form on something, even if they do buy that, because I guarantee a whole bunch of people get stuck. They don't want to back off, and then they buy something. Maybe they're not even using that ball, right? Like maybe it's still sitting there in a package, but the person who read 3 blog posts and then came on your site and then bought the package that they most wanted, that's not sitting in the closet. So as my wife told me, I've got a 6 o'clock Zoom dinner cooking with Lombardo's, Ristorante Lombardo.
Wow.
So I'm gonna pop, my friend. But thank you so much for coming out here and for spending this much time. That was not part of the plan, but I think this was an incredible conversation.
I would definitely have cut this conversation way short if I had Lombardo's waiting. So
yeah. Well, they're still there. It'll take Tommy a minute to get cooked up, but yeah. Shout out to Lombardo's. They do meal kits. And it's amazing, high quality, like Lombardo quality food. And even people like us can execute it. Like we couldn't do Get Fresh very well because of the complexity. Lombardo's meal kits are killing it. So
all right, I'll keep that on the back burner for date night. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And you look impressive cooking a gourmet meal. It's really sweet. But Steve, buddy, thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming out, sharing some beers, That IPA, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.